If you're looking to become King the Conqueror in Manor Lords, I'm going to show you all the tips that you need to know to get started on the right foot in Manor Lords. I'm going to make sure to explain everything so that way if you have any questions Manor Lords related, hopefully I answer every single thing there in this video. So you're going to start out with a small settlement just like this, just basically a set of tents. And you're going to be instructed to build burgage plots for your people to live in. Now, these burgage plots are going to not only house your people, but these burgage plots will also be used for later in the game specialties for crafting, as well as also for some food and hide production through other things that you can have in your backyard. Now, firstly, to get started, it's going to require you build 5 small burgage plots, and all you have to do is create 5 burgage plots here in a row. To start, it's recommended just to keep them in a row if possible, because it's much easier to manage them this way. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can ideally build these. This is essentially Burgage Plot 101. And so if you see here, you can actually just drag and select to create a standard 1 burgage plot spot right here. This is going to contain the primary house that's identified by this main icon, the secondary potential like guest house, and this backyard area. Now, as you can see here, this burgage plot level 1 just has a somewhat empty backyard, a regular house, and a smaller house next to it. That means you can house 1 family in the main house and 1 family once upgraded into the side house. If you see here, I click on this, and if I go to people, you can see I have 0 out of 1 residing families here. When you build a plot big enough that allows for this side house, you can actually then come in here and expand the living space, and it allows for an extra secondary family to begin living here. You can see now they built a secondary house on the side, and now we have 2 families that can actually reside here now, giving us extra room for a single family. Now, another thing with burgage plots are the extensions. So you can have a couple of different extensions here. They're going to be the vegetable garden, the chicken coop, and the goat shed. The goat shed provides you with hide that you can then turn into linen and other sorts of clothes. So you can do that and have a goat shed in the back. You can also have a chicken coop, which will provide you a decent amount of eggs. As you can see, look at my food here. I have 31 eggs just from passive chicken eggs being laid on some of my burgage plots. Very good to invest in. And then a vegetable garden, which provides vegetables, but it does require some labor by the actual families themselves to take care of this, meaning they're not going to be as efficient at whatever work they're doing at wherever they're assigned in your village, because at some level they have to attend to this garden depending on how big it is. Now, the burgage plot backyard does not matter for goat sheds and chicken coops in the terms of the actual size that it is. You can make it the smallest size possible, and the chicken and the goat will provide the same amount of resources. So the vegetable garden in the back is dependent on how big the backyard is. So the bigger the backyard, the more vegetables that are going to be grown. Keep in mind, it does take longer for families to harvest this big of a backyard, but unlike the other options, the backyard determines how many vegetables you grow. And ideally, the best way to grow vegetables is to make the smallest possible plot in terms of width, so it's quicker for your families to actually farm through the backyard. Next, you'll have to create a bunch of different buildings, which we'll go through here in just a second. But first, you should understand work location. Work location is very important, where your burgage plots actually are compared to where your people actually work. For instance, if we go over to this honey camp over here, and we go into the people section, you can see right now we have people out currently. Now, if we click on this home button, this will show the home that the family actually resides in. So you can see they're right here, which means they're not really that far away. They just have to take the road up and around, and they're right there. Now, the reason you want to pay attention to this is because if your burgage plot over here is one of the homes that they lived in, they would then have to travel across the entire village, making them very much less productive for their entire day's work, overall getting you less resources. So make sure the families that are assigned to those work locations and different things like hunting camps or logging camps, for instance, live in burgage plots close to them. And if not, you can come in here, go to people again, and reassign them by using this option right here. Next is going to be your market location. You want to put down your market very early when starting a new village, because your market is what will be used to distribute your goods across your different burgage plots. So as you can see here, your burgage plots have different needs. Depending on the level they are, level 1 has much less needs, and level 3 has much more needs, obviously, than level 1. Things like water access, having tavern supply, fuel supply, food, and clothing are needed to not only keep your villagers happy, but also have to be met to upgrade your burgage plots to make them much better. Fuel, food, and clothing are all distributed at the marketplace, which is why you need to make sure you have your marketplace set up early, and your villagers will naturally set up stalls to sell these goods to other villagers. In order to set up the market, you just have to go to your construction tab, residential, and set up your marketplace. You can freeform set it up wherever you'd like, but the primary thing you want to pay attention to is set it in the middle of your village, close enough so that every burgage plot has an opportunity to get to it and get supplies. You can see if we click into our marketplace here, this shows us the supply and demand. For instance, fuel, you can see every burgage plot we have has fuel. Every burgage plot we have has a variety of clothing, and most of them have food and decent food variety. But you can see the ones on the outside in red over here, on the left and right, don't have as much as the people in the center. And the reason you put your marketplace in the center and try and build burgage plots close together so they're easier to maintain, because the closer a burgage plot is, the quicker they can get to the market and they will be served essentially first. So if you only have 10 pieces of bread, these people in the middle are going to get bread, and these people in the outer banks are going to essentially get nothing. That's why you should distribute your burgage plots evenly all around your marketplace. So in the marketplace, there will be 3 different types of stalls that the vendors essentially set up themselves: firewood stall, a food stall, and a clothing stall. You can see by clicking in the clothing stall, we have a variety of different clothing here that will be made by a bunch of the different buildings. Again, a food stall here, you can see each one will sell essentially something separate depending on who is set up at what stall. And then a firewood stall, which would distribute that firewood that is created by your woodcutter's lodge over here across your village to supply your entire village with these resources. Hitching posts and stalls are very important. Hitching posts provide one actual stable space. You can upgrade it then through this option right here to upgrade it to 2, so you can hold 2 different pieces of livestock here. And the hitching post is extremely important because assigned families become permanent ox guides. This makes a big difference because instead of just one person or 2 people having to haul an entire log, an ox can haul a log like you can see being done right here, and it speeds up the time that stuff gets moved. Now, once your town begins to make some money, you can come in here and actually purchase another ox. Keep in mind, a single hitching post only has 1 stable space. You'll actually have to upgrade it here to a small stable in order for it to have 2 total. You want to make sure you have as many ox as possible, so that way you can improve your overall town logistics. You also want to make sure you assign people to these hitching posts and small stables, because by assigning families, they become permanent ox guides and speeds up your logistic, especially around construction and building of new buildings, to make it go much, much quicker. This makes your 2nd and 3rd hitching post as your town gets bigger a much needed thing. Next is building location, which is extremely important. Depending on the campaign that you're in, you will start in one segment of the map and can't actually reach outside of that segment until you get enough renown in the top right where it allows you to claim another region. Now, each area has a variety of different deposits, and you want to focus on placing parts of your base near different valuable resources. For instance, areas like this are going to be best case scenario for your town because all of the resources are essentially clumped up together. Now, what this will allow you to do is place a forager's camp here to easily get berries. Simply easy extend over to this clay deposit to start mining clay. And the same with iron, and then your stone deposit and your wild animals hunting grounds are right here as well. This is where, before you start building your town right out of the gate, you want to see where you want to prioritize putting your main buildings and burgage plots so they're easy enough to get to these places, but also don't interfere with them. Now, also, you'll additionally have to start off placing a well on an underground water source. If you click into your construction menu and click the underground water source here, you can see that that water source is shown right there, so you can put your well directly on top of it and then start building your town, giving you a central, easy place again for your marketplace and all of your buildings. Next, we want to talk about all of the wood-based buildings, including the logging camp, the woodcutter's lodge, and the forester's hut. Now, the logging camp should be one of the first buildings you completely build because you need timber very quickly and very much for everything. Now, on a new village, you would want to start building this logging camp in a heavily wooded area, so that way your people don't have to walk far to get logs at the very beginning of the game. Because logs are used for absolutely everything, this is super important to do, and you want to try and keep 1 or 2 people assigned here at all times, so you can consistently get logs because it's used for basically every single thing in the game. Keep in mind when building a logging camp or any one of these buildings, especially early, try and make sure you build it in an open area, not to tear down a bunch of trees. You can see if I place this right here, it just currently costs me 2 timber. If I place it over here, it's going to uproot 8 to 9 trees just by this one individual spot. This is going to lose us a free 9 timber and resources just because we built over top of this forest. So make sure you keep that in mind when placing any buildings. Now, the next is the woodcutter's lodge. Now, this is extremely important because it provides us with firewood that we're going to use to keep our entire village warm. You can see here in the marketplace, each house has to have fuel. If they don't have fuel or they're not warm, those villagers will essentially leave or they will just die off. Now also other buildings do require firewood, which are a requirement for some buildings to be refueled. The bloomery, for instance, that is used to create iron slabs requires that it has a certain amount of firewood so that way it can be refueled. Otherwise, they essentially won't be able to do their job or produce anything out of this building. Firewood is one of the primary resources. You can see up here we have 227 stacked up, getting ready for the winter months. Now the woodcutter's lodge again can be placed near a forested area towards the beginning. The workers actually go out and fell nearby trees for the logging camp, and they also go out and cut down trees individually for this as well. And finally is the forester's hut. The forester's hut is used to actually replant trees in specified zones. You can assign people here and they will begin to walk out and replant trees for you. You can use the advanced tab in this building and basically every other building if you cut down a certain area of trees and you want to work on replanting that specific area, to actually come out here and increase or decrease the area and select specific zones to replant. Or again, even if you wanted to do that with the logging camp, to cut down specific areas of trees, you could do that as well. Next, I want to go over supplies. So as you continue to craft new things or get more resources, you can see there's a certain amount of storage here that is possible in each individual building. Now, for instance, the logging camp gives us 29 spots here for timber, and we're currently over that amount. And what happens is that will actually stop production entirely, allowing them to not actually get any more logs until we transport those logs into, let's say, the storehouse. Now, supplies are different from timber stored this way or anything stored in one of your storehouses or your granary. Supplies is resources that are left out, and if resources are left out, things like rain and the elements can actually ruin those resources. This is one thing you want to keep in mind when either moving or demolishing a building. You can see here if we demolish this level 1 Burgage Plot, it's going to actually leave behind the resources or supplies that were used to make it. These supplies are actually open now to the elements and can be destroyed by things like rain. Now currently there's not an ideal way to pick these supplies up. Eventually they'll pick it up and bring it to the storehouse. Now we'll talk about the storehouses, specifically the storehouse and the granary. The storehouse is going to be used to keep in storage basically most all of your actual resources, every single thing that's not food. So everything for your storehouse will be kept here once it's transported from either whatever building it's created in or whatever building it's found in. Everything will be stored here, and this is the safe storage area that everything needs to go. Now you'll start off with a small storage house and could eventually upgrade it to a large one. The same goes for the granary. You can see we're currently storing 59 bread here. All of your food items will be stored here, and like that, you can see there's also an option to upgrade to a large granary. So again, all of your food items will go to the granary and all of your actual resources will go to your storehouse. Now for both of them, it's important to keep people assigned to them. If you don't keep people assigned to them, they're not going to transport items from, let's say, this logging camp over to the storehouse. Those items will just continue to sit at the logging camp until they can't make any more. Now, if you don't want them storing any particular item, in the advanced tab, you can actually come under here and uncheck specific items. This is good because if you want to keep your large storage house here, but also put a storage house over here just to keep your animal hide, maybe it's quicker for them to transport it and keep it over there. You can come into this storage house, go to advanced, uncheck animal hide so that they won't go and get any animal hide, and then come over here, build another storehouse over here somewhere and uncheck everything, but recheck the animal hide. So you can store hide or specific things over here and other things over here. Next, we want to talk about unassigned families. Families that are unassigned will actually work on construction and include guiding the ox to transport timber. This is important because especially at the beginning of the game when you're building a lot of burgage plots and things like this, you always need to have at least one unassigned family in your village so that way they can work on the construction. Again, if I want to put a bunch of burgage plots right here, this is going to require that people come and work on these to complete them. People that are assigned to a job somewhere in your village are not able to work on this. It's only unassigned families. So the more unassigned you have, the quicker you're able to build and work on construction, which is why you need at least one at all times. If you do not have one available as unassigned, if you construct any building, it will not get built until you unassign a family, so that way they can then work on it. Next is using the tab key. Now, I didn't even know this existed early on, but this tells you everything about your village. This tells you every single thing about how many families are assigned to each individual building, as well as the resources that each building has or the resources that each building is missing. So if you want to use this as a quick glance to see how many people are assigned to what buildings, this is also important for farming too, because regardless of how fertile your lands are, determines how much wheat and crops you can actually grow. I have a full video on farming if you want to check that out in the description. But if this land was completely fertile, maybe this number at the end would be possibly 250 total wheat that it could grow. This shows you it's grown 0 out of 250 so far. Again, this one can only grow up to 41 because of the size of the plot and the fertility level, but the maximum amount this plot can grow is 41. The tab extension shows us that, and it shows us it's almost at its maximum amount of wheat, meaning we can almost harvest it early very soon once we get to that point. Another important thing are development points. As soon as you get development points, you should strategically place them and try not to wait. Each time you upgrade your settlement level from small town to medium town, from small village to medium village, you'll get a development point that you can then place strategically to give your city basically an advantage. I don't recommend taking all the routes I took. This is just kind of a test village, but ideally things to start out that would really help you are forest management. So once you complete that first requirement and get a point that you can put in your town, you might want to do things like forest management that doubles your capacity of all berry deposits. This means you're going to get double the amount of berries, hence double the amount of food, and berries early on are an extreme source of food for your entire village, making this a very good perk to get early. Now keep in mind you can't actually respec these perks that I'm aware of yet, but using your development points wisely are going to determine how your town runs and how efficiently your town runs. For instance, things like the heavy plow allow us to plow our fields much quicker to allow us to tend to a lot more crops and ultimately grow a lot more crops this way. And the bakery extension allowing us to create much more bread, or double the amount of bread we normally would be able to with the flour that we have. Other things like orchardry and rye cultivation allows us to plant rye, resulting in a lot more overall crops. Foreign suppliers giving us a free source of firewood and bread as long as we have enough regional wealth. Trade logistics allowing us to establish a trade route for a maximum of 25 regional wealth. At the beginning of the game, these sometimes can cost up to 80 gold, so this is a very useful development skill, as well as better deals. This removes the tariffs from foreign imports. So once you establish a manor, which it will tell you to do, you're also going to establish a tax center. Now, once you establish a manor, within the manor itself, you're going to be able to establish taxes. So there are currently two types of taxes available for the early access version, a land tax and a tithe tax. Keep in mind, both of these taxes, when implemented, the more you implement of them, your predicted approval loss will decrease. So you can see if I upgrade my land tax to 45 or 55%, my approval loss is going to go way down, and we're going to lose everyone in our village over a couple months. So you want to keep these reasonable, but the land tax itself allows you to collect wealth from your village. This wealth actually goes into your treasury up here. This is going to be the money you collect from taxes, doing things like defeating bandit camps and other big areas that reward you with money. Now, outside of taxes, we also have tithe. This is a percentage of surplus food that is given to the church in return for gaining influence. Influence is used to claim different areas of the map. For instance, to claim your secondary area, it's going to require down here at the bottom, you can see, for instance, 1,000 influence. Again, by increasing this tithe number, 5% of the extra food that you have in surplus will be donated to the church to slowly increase this influence value. Early on, it's recommended to just set this to 0 because you don't need the overall influence. Primarily, you need to focus that you have enough food and your villagers do not starve to death. This is going to be the money you collect from taxes, doing things like defeating bandit camps and other big areas that reward you with money. You can use this money to essentially hire different army members or people in your retinue, which again will give you more soldiers to hire, allowing you to build a gigantic army this way. Now again, on top of your regular army from your villagers that you can equip different pieces of armor and weaponry to them, you can also create new units and hire mercenaries this way. This is going to allow you to pay gold per month to hire different levels of mercenaries that you can then add to your army to go out and fight with you. Now, upgrading your town is obviously one of the primary goals in Manor Lords, but if you look at the top, you can actually see your current settlement level and what you need to do in order to increase that settlement level. And the quicker you do this, again, the quicker you get the development points needed to make your town even better and much more efficient. Now you can see it here, it requires Burgage Plots level 1 or higher, 10 out of 10, and level 2 Burgage Plots 2 out of 5. Now the important thing here is early, if you create 10 level 1 Burgage Plots like this allows you to have room for about 10 to 12 families depending on how you build them, and allows you to get a lot of things up and going with your town. Now, once you get ready to upgrade a Burgage Plot to level 2, you can see there are certain requirements here that need to be met in order to actually upgrade them. For instance, water access is needed, which is where you place your well somewhere in your village. The church level requirement, meaning we need at least a wooden church. If we scroll out over here, you can see we've built a wooden church right here, so that requirement is met as well. We also need a fuel stall supply, a food stall, and a clothing stall supply. You can see for the clothing stall, distributed to this house just needs either one of linen, leather, or yarn. And for fuel, all we need is enough fuel or firewood on the marketplace, meaning just our firewood that we have up here. You see both those requirements are met. Now for level 1 Burgage Plots, you can see the food stall requires at least 2 types of food on level 1 Burgage Plots, meaning we need 2 different types of food available on the marketplace. Currently, you can see if we look at our food up here, we have meat, berries, and eggs, and available to this Burgage Plot that essentially meets our requirement through the marketplace. Now, the best way to check this is to click not on a stall within itself, but in the marketplace, and you can go check on fuel to see which Burgage Plots are distributed fuel, which ones are distributed food variety, and which are distributed clothing. Again, this depends on how far away the Burgage Plot is away from the marketplace and just how much is available. So make sure you have enough available of all of these in order to meet those requirements. Again, if all these requirements are met, we then have the ability to upgrade this to a level 2 Burgage Plot, and then once doing so, we would have to complete 2 more level 2 Burgage Plots, and we would then be able to upgrade our town to a large village and get that free development point. This works again the same way for a Burgage Plot level 3. So in order to go from a level 2 to level 3, you'll then have to create a tavern and start producing ale made out of barley. The church level, you have to upgrade your church to a stone church, which when you click on it, you can see you can do that here. Keep in mind this does require clay tiles, but again, it also requires an additional clothing item, and these clothing items are different. These are actually going to be crafted items. So you have to create a weaver's workshop, as well as set one of these Burgage Plots as a tailor's workshop in order to make the clothes. And the food stall supply will require a 3rd different type of food be distributed here. Now, one thing I want to mention about Burgage Plots, specifically different than the backyard here, are the actual artisan workshops. So once you get to a Burgage Plot level 2, you then have the ability to turn any one of these into an artisan workshop. The way artisan workshops work in Manor Lords is essentially you turn this house or this Burgage Plot into its own factory or workshop, and that way all of the families that live within this house essentially work on only this. So if these people are currently in, let's say, the Forester's hut over here, if you upgrade this, the families here will only work, let's say, on being members of the bakery if we turn this into a bakery, meaning you can't actually reassign them over here anymore, meaning you'll have to get 2 more people to cover the Forester's hut. All of these are essentially vital points for creating a solid village in Manor Lords. Things like the blacksmith allow you to build spears, swords, sidearms, and tools. Other things like the tailor's workshop allow you to craft clothes, cloaks, and gambesons, stuff that your citizens will casually wear. And the armorer's workshop will allow you to make helmets and other armor. Keep in mind when you choose this artisan workshop, you make all of the families again work in this artisan workshop and cannot be reassigned elsewhere. So assigning something like a level 2 Burgage Plot with 2 families in it might make more sense because it might only require 1 or 2 families to do the job of this shop. If you assign a Burgage Plot level 3 and you assign all 4 of these families that live in this one in here, this means 4 families are going to be taken out of your work of other areas and assigned to that one general task. It might not take 4 families to make shoes, for instance. Now, combat is fairly simple. So you can see you can get your army here via the army tab. And the way this works is retinue. Once you create a manor, you get some, and you can essentially hire some as well. But other members of this are all just members of your town and different family members from within the village. Different family members will be assigned different roles and will require, again, different things like spear militia people of your army require 2 things primarily, a spear and a shield. You can see we have 13 spears and 11 large shields. So we only have 11 spear militia. This is again taken from men that are parts of our total population. The same goes for militia footmen. You can see we need 36 swords and 36 small shields. We have that maxed out, so we then can have a total of 36 militia footmen. And again, you can see the clothes list on the bottom there. That's just additional clothing and armor that those militia are going to have to help keep them alive and ultimately fight better. Now, for instance, we don't have any polearms. That's why we don't have any polearm militia. And the same with archers because we don't have any bows currently. Now, if we create a new unit and we create another militia footman unit, you can see we now have 21 additional militia footmen because we had additional supplies. So some of our extra population, by doing that, just grab the supplies, and now we have a much bigger army. Now, if you want to summon the army, you can click the unit, click the rally button, and select a spot for them to rally. And again, you can do this with each different unit that you have, allowing them to all come out, and they can all be rallied in an area if, let's say, you're going on an attack or just wanting to defend your village. Now, when you're fighting, morale is actually the willingness to fight. So if it reaches critical points, some stances will actually become unavailable, and eventually that unit, if the morale gets low enough, will flee. Meaning if your morale for your army gets low enough, they will flee. And the same exact thing with the enemies. Your fatigue is when your soldiers become tired when fighting, so you want to make sure their fatigue when going into a battle is as high as possible. And effectiveness is the attack and defense multiplier. The higher your effectiveness is, the more damage and better you're going to do against the enemy. Different things can affect your effectiveness, such as if you're fighting on the top of a hill and the enemy's on the bottom side of the hill, that will give you higher effectiveness because you essentially have an advantage over them. And you can hold tab on the army to actually inspect some of the details of your army. Now, one trick to keep in mind is once you select your army and begin to move them, you might actually want to change this run to positions and turn that off, because it actually costs you a lot of fatigue to run. So if you run into a group of enemies and you're all fatigued, your army is going to perish in a horrible death. And these are the stances or commands you can use to fight, and you can use your right click to essentially assemble your army in any specific stance you want by dragging across the formation and allowing you to control different units at any given time by selecting them and telling them to move or spread out individually. Those are the basics of combat, and we'll go much more in depth in a different video. Next will be trade. So trade can be very important because it allows you to gain a lot of money for a lot of things that you have surpluses in. Certain areas of the map will have different surpluses in certain areas. So depending on where you actually start in the game, you can get surpluses in a lot of different things and trade them for a lot of currency that benefits you to buy things like oxes and other things that you don't have available, let's say like bread or firewood. Now, in order to trade, you have to build a trading post, and you'll have to assign people here so that way they can actually trade the goods. Now, once you've done that, you can go into any tab and you can select to import or export specific goods. Exporting is obviously going to sell that good, and importing will import the good. And trade allows you to trade until your desired surplus is reached. Now, when starting, there will be an import and export price here. It will cost significantly more to import the good to you and buy it than it will to actually export it or sell it. You can actually click this establish trade route button, and it will give you a dedicated traveling merchant for this item that will visit your region to trade only that specific good, making trading go much faster once you get to where you're trading, importing, and exporting a lot of goods at once, making this extremely useful. Again, currently things like planks that I have an abundance for, I sell for a lot of currency and export them almost entirely. And then with the money I make from that, I import goods for instance, crops or other things that I need, which is why trading is so useful. Keep in mind from the development tab, two primary things, which are trade logistics. So that way you establish a new trade route, and it only costs 25 regional wealth, are very good. And the ultimate trading perk, better deals. If you're looking to trade, you have to get this for your town because it removes the tariff from foreign imports, drastically reducing the import prices, saving me a lot of money. Now, finally, one of the other big things you need to know is bandits and bandit camps. Essentially, when you start off playing on any difficulty that will include bandit camps, those bandits will occasionally walk all the way to your camp and steal some of your supplies at random, really hurting your village, especially early on. As soon as you get enough militia or army built up, in which case certain campaigns give you enough supplies to have some military members kind of early, you can locate those bandit camps by hitting M and looking at the overall map. The bandit camps will look like a tent icon on the map. Once you find those, you can actually go and take them out, again, just using your regular combat tactics. And upon beating the actual bandits themselves, you can march over to the bandit camp to essentially destroy it or take it over. Once you get to the bandit camp, you can then have a choice to send some supplies back to your camp, giving you a little bit of supplies, or you can take the stuff for yourself personally and store money in your treasury. Ideally, early on, this is probably the best thing to do because your treasury allows you to hire retinue and other mercenaries and allows you to settle different regions because you're going to need that overall currency within your treasury much later in the game. That being said, those are the things you must know in Manor Lords. If this video helped you at all, make sure to drop a like and subscribe if you're new. A bunch of more Manor Lords guides coming out. This game is extremely fun. That being said, thank you guys. Peace.